Hey guys, welcome back to the A-Level Lessons Lit series. Today, we're taking a look at Ariel by Sylvia Plath, a possible set text you could do from paper 3. More specifically, we're looking at sheep in fog. But before we get started, just a short introduction to Ploth and Ariel. Ploth was a 20th century confessional poet who is unfortunately best known for killing herself. And Ariel, in turn, is best known for being the collection she wrote right before her death. This has led to a truly staggering number of hot takes about how literally every poem in the collection foreshadows her manner of death. And I'm not really here for it. So, insofar as it is possible, I will be focusing on the literary merits, or lack thereof, of Ploth's work, and only bring in biographical details when it is absolutely necessary. That being said, let's go. So the first thing we look at is, of course, the title, Sheep in Fog, and that already gives us a very good clue about what the rest of the vibe of the poem will be. Because firstly, you have sheep, which in our culture already has a sort of cloud-like connotation, by the virtue of being soft and fluffy, and there's also that sense of pastoral, kind of country-like implication of being able to see sheep. But I think the more interesting word here would actually be fog, because fog has an implication of haziness. You say that someone is in a fog if they're not supremely alert or sort of in a slightly dreamlike state. And that is pretty much the vibe that is going forth in this entire poem. Moving on to the first verse of the poem, the hills step off into whiteness. People or stars regard me sadly. I disappoint them. So I think the first line is particularly interesting because it shows one technique that Ploth really likes to use, and also a motif that will sort of resonate throughout the rest of the collection. And the first thing is that the hills are personified. They're said to step off, even though, of course, hills cannot really step off. And that's interesting because of the motion that is implied by usually stationary hills. Whiteness is also really interesting because it's a color motif that Ploth uses a lot in this collection, and one has to wonder what is the connotation of white here, both in this poem and the others of the collection. The next line, people or stars, is unusual to say the least, because I think most people would be able to know if they were looking at another person or literal stars. But it does bring two different options of reading it to light. The first one is, of course, that the fog is so thick that the speaker literally cannot see whether she is looking at people or stars. And the second option is that she just doesn't care which one she's looking at. And I think that both bring really different views to your interpretation. And the mention of stars brings a sense of cosmic judgment to the next lines, regard me sadly. The idea of multiple readings is also echoed in I disappoint them, because there are a lot of different ways to interpret the line I disappointed them. Personally, I take it as a sort of resigned, matter-of-fact statement, but it could also be interpreted as a disappointment at being disappointing. The next verse moves to a slightly different idea. The train leaves a line of breath, oh slow horse, the color of rust. And again in the first line we can see the personification of the train via the line of breath, but also a sort of addition to the already foggy nature of the landscape because of the steam that is being emitted from the train. Oh slow is a really remarkable line because it is immensely short and yet very long due to the use of assonance regarding the long O vowel. As the speaker talks about a slow object, she is literally slowing down. Horse, the color of rust. I said no biographical detail, but there is a possibility that the horse in this line refers to Ariel, Ploth's favorite horse and the thing the collection was named after. The color of rust is interesting because of, again, the use of color motifs, which Ploth really likes to do in this poem and in multiple other poems in the collection, but also because rust has a sort of connotation of decay, of breaking down. Then we get hooves, Dolores Bells, all morning the morning has been blackening. And hooves just slows down the poem even more because it has a long O sound as compared to horse with a short O sound. Dolores Bells is also interesting because it emphasizes the assonance of the vowel O as compared to something like sad or sorrowful. And I think it is also slightly onomatopoeic because you have your do sound, which sounds suspiciously similar to the dong sound associated with old bells. Then all morning the morning has been blackening. Now that's not only repetition, which slows down the poem once more, but it might also be a pun because morning is of course a homophone of the word mourning, in that one is in mourning for something sad. And we get another use of color, blackening, because black also has the connotation of mourning, but it is interesting that a morning should be blackening when, when the sun rises, it should ostensibly be growing lighter. A flower left out. My bones hold a stillness, the far fields melt my heart. A flower left out is probably one of the least specific flower references that Ploth has in the whole of Ariel, and I think that it might bring to mind ideas of negligence, beauty left to rot, but it should also be compared to other poems with flower motifs. So, for example, tulips, or perhaps more aptly, poppies in October, which literally has poppies left out long after their season. My bones hold a stillness is the first instance in the collection of a technique that I like to call Ploth's depersonification. Because note the contrast between the stillness of the living speaker's bones as compared to the movement of the inanimate hills or the train or the horse. It's still in contrast with the movement of everything else, and in personifying these other inanimate objects, she herself seems to become less human and less alive. The far fields is just another instance of scenic imagery in this poem, but it is notably flatter as compared to the hills, which would ostensibly, have curves. And it's interesting again that they melt her heart, so melt my heart, and that's a connotation of beauty because usually when one says that scenery melts their heart, it's because it's so beautiful that they can't help but feel that way. But again, it's the typically inanimate object that's doing the heavy lifting. Her heart was originally frozen, but she's not the one that melts it. It's the placid scenery. And that brings us to the last verse. They threaten to let me through to a heaven, starless and fatherless, a dark water. And as you can probably see, threaten is a really weird, unusual choice of words here, because not only is it kind of ominous, it also doesn't really seem to gel with our conceptualization of heaven, since, heaven is generally characterized as a place that one would actually want to go to. And that also gives a sort of double meaning to the phrase, to let me, because there are two ways to interpret to let me. And the first one is that she wants to go, but the fields and the hills and the landscape traditionally wouldn't let her, but now they're letting her go. Or in the sense, that one lets somebody fall, that they're the only thing stopping her from falling into heaven. Starless and fatherless also seems like a callback to the first verse's people or stars, but I think it's worth noting that the people here has been replaced with father. And I do say no biographical detail, but as another poem in this collection shows, the poem Daddy, Ploth didn't exactly have the best relationship with her father, so this could be an allusion to that tumultuous relationship. A dark water is also this really impactful image to end the whole poem on for two main reasons. The first is that it's a continuation of the color motif, so moving from whiteness to darkness, but also because it is water as compared to the land of the remaining scenery, and that gives the sense, I suppose, of drowning off or of falling in to something deeper than everything else that has been represented. So now that we've gone through the poem line by line, let's talk a little bit about the vibe of the entire poem. I got the feeling that there is a sense of melancholic loneliness. There's the note of the failure to meet expectations and a deep stillness, especially in contrast to all the other objects which are moving. And because of all these vibes, I feel that it is best for essays about disassociation, distancing yourself from the landscape while also seeing yourself in it. The meeting of societal expectations, so maybe one could compare this to something like The Applicant or Tulips, even though I don't think it is the best poem for such questions. And maybe about death, although that's a little iffy, because as I noted before, anything can be read as being about death if you want to read it in that direction. I definitely think that this is a very good poem for essays about color and imagery. That being said, that's all from me, folks. See you later this week. If you enjoyed this video and it was helpful for you, please do leave a like, comment, or even subscribe to this channel for more from me. Bye!